by the idolaters to violate their pledge and to join the Quraysh, as these Jews were acquainted with the hypocrites within the walls of the city, were waiting for an opportunity to play their part. The situation of the Muslims was most dangerous. The siege had already lasted for 20 days. The enemy made great efforts to cross the trench, but every attempt was fiercely repulsed by the small Muslim force. Disunion was now rife in the midst of the besieging army. Their horses were perishing fast, and provisions were becoming less every day. During the night, a storm of wind, of rain, caused their tents to be overthrown and their lights extinguished. Abu Sufyan and the majority of his army fled, and the rest took refuge with the Qurayza. The Muslims, though they were satisfied with the failure of their enemies, could not help thinking that the victory was unsatisfied so long as the Qurayza, who had violated their sworn pledge, remained so near. The Jews might at any time surprise Medina. From their side, the Muslims felt it their duty to demand an explanation of the violation of the pledge. This was utterly refused. Consequently, the Jews were besieged and compelled to surrender at discretion. They only asked that their punishment should be left to the judgment of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, the prince of the tribe of Aus. This chief who was a fierce soldier, had been wounded in the attack, and indeed died of his wounds the following day, infuriated by the treacherous conduct of the Banu Qurayza. He gave judgment that the fighting men should be to death, and that the women and the children should become the slaves of the Muslims. The sentence was carried into execution. The Prophet protects the Christians of Medina. It was about this time that the Prophet granted to monks of the monastery of St. Catherine near Mount Sinai his liberal charter, by which they secured for the Christians noble and generous privileges and immunities. He undertook himself and enjoined his followers to protect the Christians, to defend their churches and the residences of their priests, and to guard them from all injuries. They were not to be unfairly taxed. No bishop was to be driven out of his diocese. No Christian was to be forced to reject his religion. No monk was to be expelled from his monastery. No pilgrim was to be stopped from his pilgrimage, nor were the Christian churches to be pulled down for the sake of building mosques or houses for the Muslims. Christian women married to Muslims were to enjoy their own religion and not to be subjected to compulsion or annoyance of any kind. If the Christians should stand in need of assistance for the repair of their churches or monasteries or any other matter pertaining to their religion, the Muslims were to assist them. This was not to be considered as supporting their religion, but as simply rendering them assistance in special circumstances. Should the Muslims be engaged in hostilities with outside Christians, no Christian resident among the Muslims should be treated with contempt on account of his creed. The Prophet declared that any Muslim violating any clause of the Charter should be regarded as a transgressor of Allah's commandments, a violator of his testament, of neglectful and his faith. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah. 6 years had already elapsed since the Prophet and his Meccan followers had fled from their birthplace. Their hearts began to yearn for their homes and for their sacred house, the Kaaba, as the season of the pilgrimage approached. The Prophet announced his intention to visit the holy center, and numerous voices of his disciples responded to the call. Preparations were soon made for the journey to Mecca. The Prophet, accompanied by 700 or 800 Muslims,